Prophecy came true in less than 8 months. Oh, this? It was never about nukes and always about turning Iran into a failed state that will be led by a U.S.-Israel puppet. Once again, the region is completely in service of our interests. We can move towards China. U.S. intervention beyond what we've done so far seems like an inevitability. That's what it is. That's what's going on. Speaking of which, breaking, the United States and Israel is planning to bombard energy-related targets in Iran, sources tell CBS News. Here is why I don't think this is real. You want to know why I don't think this is real? You want to know why I think this is fake? I mean, hopefully I'm not wrong, okay? So there were 3 plans that I think were presented to Donald Trump. Either the first plan, situation monitoring is happening right now, by the way, for those of you who are listening to the situation monitors, it's time. Wee woo, situation monitor o'clock. Okay, let me explain something to you. There is speculation that there were 3 different plans that were presented to Donald Trump. One was continue bombing targets in a tit-for-tat, escalation ladder tactic that we have utilized thus far, which has, yielded no military results. Number 1, tit-for-tat bombing campaign maintains primacy over the Strait of Hormuz. Then the United States of America goes back and strikes, southern targets, all this stuff. What we've done for the last 160 days in this back and forth that has been an abject failure as far as achieving any of the military goals that the United States of America wants to achieve. Okay? The second option is going through the process of trying to establish a military foothold in the coastal area of Iran and potentially the island chains that are like approximately 20 to 30 kilometers off of the coastline of Iran. Keshem Island, Karg Island. There are numerous different islands that the United States of America believes it could potentially hold with boots on the ground military warfare, okay? With a full-blown invasion. Now, that's less likely because this would require a tremendous amount of American casualties. And Trump, so far, is not invested in the American casualties. He doesn't want to do this big military conquest. But who knows? As the situation worsens for him, he could get more erratic because he's an insane person. Okay? The third option is even funnier, and that's the one that they're presenting right now on CBS News as the likely scenario. U.S. and Israel are preparing to bombard energy-related targets in Iran, sources say. Now, there's a reason why this is unlikely, but who knows? Maybe they'll do it. 2 reasons. Number 1, if they bomb energy-related targets in Iran, Iran will retaliate by bombing energy targets in the Gulf and will destroy the global energy supply for a decade and onward, okay? For a decade to come. Because as it stands currently, this is basically the energy nuclear option, right? Iran has not deployed this. Iran has not attacked all of the energy infrastructure in the Gulf because that would destroy the global markets permanently, okay? It would destroy it in an irreparable manner that even Trump could not manipulate his way around, okay? This would have this would create tremendous volatility in the stock markets. This is not something that Donald Trump wants to do. That's the number 1 reason why they haven't done this. The number 2 reason why they haven't done this so far is even funnier. It's because we don't have the missiles. We literally do not have enough standoff munitions, and we haven't been able to establish air superiority, given that even with the manpads that Iran has, they've been able to establish sufficient anti-air defenses. That is part of the reason why we've been deploying our standoff munitions rather than deploying these unguided gravity bombs and JDAMs over Iranian airspace, which requires F-35s and other fighter jets to fly over the Iranian airspace. They've rejected these options over and over again, even though these are the only options that remain on the table, right? Tit for tat with the standoff munitions, number 1, which is what we've been doing, which has been an abject failure. This is why they're looking for number 2 and number 3 now. Number 2 being a boots on the ground invasion of the coastal area of Iran and potentially the invasion of the islands. But even if you invade, there is going to be tremendous amounts of casualties on the American side. This is far too costly for the Americans to lean into. At least for the time being, Trump has shown no appetite to do this, right? And number three being the destruction of the entire energy infrastructure in Iran, the refineries and the like. Now, the third option is also, once again, unlikely. And the reason why it's unlikely is because we do not have enough standoff munitions to destroy the entirety of the Iranian power plants, to destroy the entirety of Iran's critical energy infrastructure. This is before we even factor in the reality that Iran will retaliate by blowing up the entire Gulf's critical energy infrastructure. So we don't even have the missiles. We don't even have the offensive capabilities to continue deploying sufficient munitions from afar to destroy the entirety of Iran's critical energy infrastructure. Think about that. So what are we to do? What can we do here? Are we just going to go beast mode? Have we developed a secret fighter jet that no one knew about that is capable of flying over the Iranian airspace without Iranian anti-air defenses targeting them and taking them out? Is there a way to do it? Are they going to try to overwhelm the Iranian airspace with an incredible amount of force by just sending in as many fighter jets as possible and sacrificing some of these $40 million, $50 million, $100 million assets, including but not limited to the American pilots or even the Israeli pilots, which is even less likely because Israel obviously is notoriously careful about not putting any of their pilots in the line of fire, because that's seemingly the only other alternative. Both the boots on the ground military invasion option and the aerial assault option requires America to be comfortable with a significant number of casualties, a significant number of pilots dying in the process. Because I'm going to repeat this one more time. According to the CSIS studies, according to the CSIS papers, America does not have sufficient munitions, sufficient standoff munitions to strike all of the Iranian plants from afar. That is where we're at. And this is a ZBS leak. So I suspect it's still Trump trying to engage in his own version of madman theory, madman diplomacy. CBS says the United States and Israel are planning what would be one of the harshest bombing campaigns to date against energy infrastructure targets in Iran, multiple sources told CBS News, with strikes possible throughout the weekend. There was some discussion about trying to conclude by time financial markets open Monday because of the concern about how the bombings will affect the U.S. and global economy, but an endpoint wasn't locked in. I told you guys this early this week. This has been the exact same strategy over and over again. The definition of insanity is trying to do the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. We are insane. We are insane. Every time the markets close, Donald Trump comes in and screams bloody murder. We are going to nuke Iran, he says. By the time markets are opening on Sunday night, he says Iran is begging for a ceasefire. Meanwhile, there's been reports coming from Reuters, which China has denied, of course, but who knows, that Iran is expected to receive up to 400 Chinese manpads, with the first deliveries arriving within weeks, multiple sources told the Reuters. The deal includes Chinese-made QW-12 and FN-16 surface-to-air missiles supplied through a Hong Kong-based intermediary. The contract covers the purchase of between 300 and 400 manpads, man-portable air defense systems, including Chinese-made QW-12 and FN-16 missiles, the sources said. China's foreign ministry said the relevant reports are completely groundless. China has consistently played a role in promoting peace and ending the conflict. Beijing-based Zhongqing Baoshang Group, the parent company of Zhongqing Baoshang International Investment, did not immediately respond to an email request for comment on Tuesday. China pulling a Lend-Lease America-style arrangement here, as America once did for the USSR, is not shocking, I guess. I don't know. Very interesting predicament. China cuts deal with the Houthis, adjusts for long U.S. war with Iran. China is cutting its own deals and gaining wartime leverage as the Trump administration scrambles to contain the war and reopen Hormuz. China also has another weapon here. Not only does China have a tremendous amount of resources that they could send to Iran in order for Iran to defend itself sufficiently in this war of aggression that started through perfidy, okay? Not only can they do that, but China also has numerous tools in the tool belt. China has numerous cards that they have not played. China has spent the last 160 days stabilizing the energy markets by destroying their own demand or destroying their own imports by more than half. They've cut their imports by more than half, leaning into their strategic petroleum reserves, which no one in the world knows how big they are, for the record. That is leverage for China. China could turn around and tweak the dial again. China could then increase demand one more time. China could turn around and start increasing their imports of oil. All of a sudden, the Asian market would collapse. China also obviously has strategic export controls that it could deploy. If you recall last year in the Day of Liberty, the tariffs regime that Donald Trump tried to implement against China and against China's trade partners to try to decouple the rest of the world from China. In one of the instances where the American side went back on their previous negotiations, China turned around and said, okay, we're implementing strategic export controls for rare earth minerals and specifically magnets. These are necessary components and necessary resources for national defense. Remember how we earlier talked about how America is running out of munitions? Not only is our procurement strategy unbelievably slow and unbelievably costly due to defense bloat, without Chinese magnets, without Chinese rare earth minerals, which China has a damn near monopoly on, we cannot make a single missile. That is the trade nuclear option. So if China deployed that, it would be over. So what are we talking about? This is before we even get into China. This is before we acknowledge that China has a lot more cards that they could deploy. Here is Jennifer Jacobs of ZBS News. During his Tuesday Oval Office meeting with Netanyahu, Israeli officials were struck by Mr. Trump's serious and very clinical approach to the Iran war. Netanyahu counseled the president on 3 options for the war: an enforceable deal focused on removal of the nuclear material, a blockade with added economic pressure, military strikes focused on attacking land routes used for transporting supplies. Now, what's really interesting about this is none of this is relevant. As we covered last week, Iran has decided, or as we covered a couple days ago, as a matter of fact, when I had a conversation with Trita Parsi of the Quincy Institute, Iran has now decided to take a new posture where they want to now maintain control over the pacing of the current battle. Iran struck first at U.S. military installations in Jordan without being struck by the American side first. This is what's causing panic in Washington, D.C., because this is new. For the longest time, even throughout the Operation Epic Fury, Iran has always taken a defensive posture, only striking back at the Gulf or striking back against American targets whenever America hit Iran first. The only time Iran established any kind of deterrence, any kind of military deterrence is to reassert its primacy over the Strait of Hormuz, oftentimes against commercial vessels that are trying to transit the Strait of Hormuz at direct odds with the Memorandum of Understanding through the Omani coastline. This is the only time Iran strikes first, right? Never towards American military installations, never towards the Gulf. They only strike towards the Gulf and at American military installations after America responds. So Iran controls the pacing of the battle now. Or at the very least, Iran is saying that they want to control the pacing of the battle now. That's very different than the posture that Iran has represented thus far. So Donald Trump taking a serious approach to the Iran war by implementing a blockade or this or that is utterly immaterial. It's utterly irrelevant. What is relevant here is how we arrive at the negotiations table, how we get Iran to believe that we will hold our word once again. There is tremendous leverage favoring the Iranian side here. There is no leverage whatsoever favoring the American side. And the Israeli side doesn't really need leverage because they're insane. The Israeli side just wants death and destruction, a failed state in Iran. The Israeli side would nuke Iran if there were no setbacks from deploying the nuclear weapons. If this did not destroy the pre-existing nuclear deterrence. And as days go by, Iran's leverage grows. As days go by, market volatility increases. As days go by, the strategic petroleum reserves deplete. And as market volatility increases, Iran gains even more leverage. So this information strikes me as odd. U.S. and Israel preparing to bombard energy-related markets in Iran, sources say. Or rather, not that it strikes me as odd, it's just an unbelievable disaster if they implement this scenario, even if they don't have the necessary resources to implement this scenario without tremendous cost. Either we just destroy what remains of our standoff munitions and never really achieve our military goals here, because as I've repeatedly explained to you over and over again, we simply do not have enough missiles. We simply do not have enough standoff munitions to strike all of Iran's critical energy infrastructure. And then on top of that, Iran can turn around and blow up the entire Gulf's energy refineries, which would destroy the global markets permanently in a way that Donald Trump can no longer manipulate his way out of. Or we try to deploy our standoff munitions and then we send as many fighter jets over the Iranian airspace as possible and try to overwhelm their anti-air defense systems. But this time, instead of overwhelming their anti-air defense systems with ballistic munitions, we will be overwhelming their anti-air defense systems with Air Force pilots. We will be sacrificing American fighter pilots and potentially upwards of $1 billion worth of very complex machinery, very expensive machinery with proprietary technology over the Iranian airspace. We'll be throwing bodies into the pile, Russian meat grinder style. It makes no sense. Perhaps a better analogy is not Russian meat grinder style, but Imperial Japanese kamikaze style. So I don't see any realistic military scenario. And I know if I can't see one, the American generals also see that same reality. No American general, regardless of how loyal they are to Donald Trump, is going to put their name on a mission like this, especially considering that there is no guarantee of success at the end of this, and only a guarantee of failure. Okay? It doesn't make any sense. But we are insane. So who knows? As I've said before, even deploying nuclear arms does not guarantee Iran standing down. It doesn't guarantee Iran refusing to strike back or destroying Iran's capabilities to strike back. So if that's the case, even the highest point of the escalation ladder would end up with a military failure. And yes, of course, this is the classic retort. After this war is over, I don't think the Straits are going to be that powerful of a leverage because people will move the energy pipelines out of the Straits to the Red Sea, from there to Israel and the Mediterranean. We can unblock this choke point, and we will. Failing to consider, and this is the classic line that you hear from the analysts, the classic line that you hear from the Foundation for Defending Democracy, from Israel. This is something Israel has wanted to do for a very long time, our over-reliance on the Strait of Hormuz. This choke point that is dangerous, which it wasn't really dangerous until Trump decided to implement Operation Epic Fury. But here's the issue. All this can be resolved if we simply design an alternative way to transport oil that's also within the range of Iranian standoff weaponry. Chris Cappy was also fantasizing about something similar. This is classic, okay? This is classic couch guy, Monday morning quarterbacking. People have floated this idea over and over again. Everybody loves floating this idea. But they fail to recognize, one, the infrastructure necessary to develop this would take far too much time, and no one would be able to develop it because the world would collapse before we got there if the Strait of Hormuz is blocked for years while they're trying to develop these pipelines. And two, even if these pipelines were to be developed in a short enough time, right? Let's say they magically were able to cut the development process timeline in half, and instead of 8 years, they did it in 4 years. These pipelines are still within range of Iranian standoff munitions. So what do? It's not like pipelines are an effective counter to Iranian ballistic munitions. Nord Stream 2 showed that if there's a will, there's a way to blow up pipelines. Okay? And them bitches were underwater, deep underwater. Not only are pipelines not capable of pushing the same volume as oil tankers are, there's a reason why we use oil tankers rather than pipelines for a lot of this stuff. Okay? You can't push the same volume. And worst of all, the pipelines are just sitting there. They don't move, which means they're far more susceptible to sabotage. They're far more susceptible to a barrage of missiles from Iranian standoff munitions. So even then, you don't solve the problem. So here was what my response was to Chris Cappy, who says something like this. Says something along these lines. He also had this exact same take. He said, the war in Iran is a strategic disaster. At least he recognizes that. Tactical successes aside, Chris Copey, I'd like to see the Islamic Republic replaced, but it's not happening without boots on the ground, which would be a terrible move. At least he recognizes that. Whether it was right to launch the war or not aside, again, can't even admit that it was a spectacular failure. Everything aside, the current situation is a huge disaster. Recognizes that it's a disaster, so that's good at least. The military is looking at moving bases west to Israel. Iran will control Hormuz and rebuild its missiles. They have every reason to accelerate nuclear weapons development. True. Bombing 200 more targets will change none of this. Also true. We have more than two options. It's not just invade or give up, but the other options suck too. We're likely going to concede Iran control over the Hormuz and build pipelines around through Iraq and Syria to circumvent it and reduce Iran's leverage. But Iran's proxies, the PMF in Iraq, can just attack those oil pipelines. My guess, we do a big bombing or a limited SF raid on an island and then leave the region, calling it a victory while we build the pipelines. I said pipelines are even more vulnerable to drone strikes. The only way out of this is through diplomacy. We lost. It's not the worst reality. We have to restrain ourselves. No more endless belligerence at the direction of Israel. We being the IRGC that supported all your favorite Islamic terror groups, the one that kills tens of thousands for protesting, that's not the same we. You're on your own. Who's we? Brother, you're not on the team, Lamau. I'm an American taxpayer, and I pay a lot more taxes than you do, dumb on Twitter with a Ukrainian flag and an American flag on your descriptor. Here's the other, I guess, alternative issue that the Americans are throwing in. Officials now believe the IRGC is firmly in control of Iran's decision-making. Yes, leaving political figures in the U.S. Leaving political figures the U.S. has been talking with as figureheads. Complicating matters are internal dynamics of the IRGC itself, where a handful of senior commanders are all jockeying for control. That is a leading reason why U.S. officials and regional partners fear the conflict is likely to drag on. The problem for the American side is that the IRGC is in control, and the IRGC, unlike the previous leadership that they assassinated, understand that strategic restraint has only delivered negative consequences. Strategic restraint has only hurt Iran because Americans and the Israelis are stupid. The Americans and the Israelis are dumb enough to believe that strategic restraint was actually because Iran simply did not have the capability of retaliation. The IRGC proved that it has the capability of retaliation. Now, the disagreements that exist within the IRGC, we don't obviously know what those disagreements are, but the speculation from people far smarter than the American side is the disagreements are ultimately marginal. It's the hardliners are in control. The ones who want to fight back are very clearly in control. It's just how much they want to fight back. There's one school of thought that is more pragmatic. They're still hardliners. They still want to fight back. They understand the necessity to fight back, but they're still saying we need to use the leverage that we've developed through military strength to inevitably teach America a lesson and to, get them out of the region. The other group is saying we have to fight until Americans no longer exist in the region. And same with the Israelis, until they are no longer a real threat. The problem for the hardliners that want to fight until it's an inevitability that everybody understands that America and Israel can no longer exist in the region is that they don't have the munitions to be able to keep up that battle.